As usual, working life has taken precedence over everything else in the run up to Christmas, and like everyone else, I'm trying to save up as much as possible for Christmas presents. However, I thought I had to step in today and say something because a couple of news stories have emerged in today's newspapers, but also in online posts as well as the BBC and ITV. Now, what am I referring to here? Well, let me first of all talk about the NHS, because many of you on social media have been lambasting the BBC in Scotland for the way it treats NHS Scotland as if it is some kind of basket case. In a recent broadcast by BBC Scotland, I think it was yesterday actually, their evening news bulletin, fully 1/3 of the entire programme was taken up in slagging off the Scottish National Health Service. Delays, people being on waiting lists, so on and so on, and bringing out at least two so-called experts from the British Medical Association to back up these ridiculous claims. Now, whilst there are definitely waiting lists and waiting times for all NHSs across these islands, including in Wales and Northern Ireland and England, the waiting times in Scotland are substantially lower than anywhere else. But, and this is the big but, the problem is that despite the BBC bad-mouthing the NHS for fully 1/3 of their news programming on BBC Scotland yesterday, they never once mentioned the United Kingdom and how it funds the Scottish NHS, because it does. Funding for the United Kingdom, in other words, the English and Welsh NHS, has been slashed. And because that's been slashed, and because of a thing called the Barnett consequentials, that means the money for the Scottish NHS has been slashed by a similar percentage, which means that the Scottish NHS is now suffering from the same ridiculous underfunding problems that the English NHS is. And any delays, any backlogs, any long waiting times, or inability of people to get appointments with GPs are not the responsibility of the NHS nor the Scottish Government, but are in actual fact directly stemming from government cuts in London, which are reflected in the Barnett consequentials here. So they are crippling the Scottish NHS and then asking the BBC to go on and on about it in 3 different news items about how bad the Scottish NHS is, without any reference to the rest of the United Kingdom's medical facilities in respect to this. There was no comparison done with Northern Ireland, Wales or England to show just how well the Scottish NHS holds up compared particularly to the English NHS, which any English Scots who've migrated here from England will tell you is garbage. The English NHS is terrible. It's chronically underfunded, and it has been for decades by the Tories and now of course by the Labour Party. But that's not the end of the British attacks on Scottish life. The latest one I almost thought was a joke until I realised it wasn't April the 1st. The BBC is to be banned, get this, from advertising porridge, oat-based products. Now, you might think, well, there are lots of different oat-based products that they could ban, but why would they want to ban oat-based products like porridge, when porridge is clearly one of the healthiest breakfast cereals you can eat? It absorbs cholesterol and flushes it out of your system. It contains high amounts of dietary fibre, which we need for our digestive systems, and it's quick and easy to make, and it keeps you boosted throughout the day with a slow release of carbohydrate. What's not to like about it? Well, they're claiming that it is a junk food. That is the category that the British government has placed our national breakfast in. They're basically saying that Scotland's breakfast, its choice of porridge in the morning, especially in the winter months, is a junk food, and we are no longer, our porridge manufacturing companies particularly, are no longer allowed to advertise their products on television or in the media because the British state says so. Now, this is not just being a nanny state and telling us what we can and can't do, what's bad for us and what isn't. We all know that porridge is a staple food in Scotland, and it has been for hundreds or even thousands of years, because for many years it was the only seed crop which would grow well in Scotland's wet conditions. But aside from all of that, the tradition of eating porridge in the morning has endured. Now, many children eat things like ready break, which is a porridge type of cereal as well, but it's mostly made of wheat, and wheat isn't nearly as nice as oats, and it's not nearly as good for you. But to describe a breakfast cereal made from rolled oats as a snack food or junk food is just plain wrong. It's not as if you're going into a corner shop and buying a porridge oat bar or something like that, which might possibly be seen as a sweet or a junk food. Real porridge is not loaded with sugar. People can eat it with salt, a pinch of salt. You can eat it with a little sugar if they want. You can even mix in fruit with it, but it certainly is not a junk food. What the hell is going on here? And why has the British government decided to destroy people's ability to see adverts for their own breakfast products? It's an attack on a way of life. It's just one of many. It's like a death of 1,000 cuts, including the NHS, as I mentioned at the beginning of the programme. And to add insult to injury, we're now being told by none other than the world's richest man, Elon Musk, that he intends to make a gigantic donation to Nigel Farage's former Brexit party, now known as Reform, which is a bit of a masquerade really, because Brexit is so unpopular they had to rebrand it. But he's now planning to give $100 million to Farage's political aspirations here in the UK. Now, in some ways, it would be very difficult for Musk to do that. He can't simply give Nigel Farage £100,000. That isn't allowed under electoral rules here. But what is allowed is for a donation to be made to a third party, a limited company in the UK, which perhaps is not for profit, which can then funnel the money to Mr. Farage's bank accounts. Now, the question then is, what is he going to use this $100 million huge war chest for? It's far more than any political party in Scotland has ever had with which to fight an election campaign. Well, I think many of us think that Farage will use the Scottish general election in 2026 as a proving ground to see how effective this massive amount of money is in buying as much advertising and promotional posts on particularly X, I would imagine, since Elon Musk is involved, and other social media platforms, promoting his Reform candidates in the Scottish general elections. And according to Ipsos Mori, the current polling suggests, but it is only a suggestion, that it's possible that Reform, Farage's Brexit party, might gain 2 Scottish seats in Holyrood Parliament in the next general election in 2026. Now, although that's not a complete disaster for the Scottish Parliament, it introduces Brexit into Scottish political discourse. Now, it's widely regarded in Scotland as a colossal mistake. Nobody in Scotland voted for Brexit. Every single region of Scotland voted substantially against leaving the EU, and yet we still find ourselves marooned in the middle of the Atlantic with no friends in Europe anymore. And most of us Scots are used to dealing with Europe, and being part of the European Union was a normal part of life. We didn't perhaps like the fact that we had to pay several $1 million or whatever it is, 100 million, hundreds of millions of pounds a year to be a member of it, but the amount that we made back from being a member state far outweighed that minor disadvantage. So what will we see if Farage manages to get 2 of his cronies in the door is we'll see more Tory politicians, because most of the people defecting to or joining the Reform Party, particularly in England, are all ex-Tories. They're all Tories who are fed up that the Tory party is not far enough to the right, it's not extreme enough, it's not populist enough, and therefore they are switching horses. So the Tory party in England is hemorrhaging all of its nutters, and they're all moving into Reform. And 2 of these are going to end up running as candidates in Holyrood in 2026, according to the polls. And there's a possibility they might even get elected, but only if the voters of Scotland allow it to happen. Would it be bad for Scotland? Of course it would. It's a foreign agent that's been inserted into the Scottish political bloodstream. It would be like being poisoned slowly by a slow-acting toxin, which is going to eat away at people's confidence in their politicians by introducing these populist post-truth politicians who regard anything they say as okay, regardless of how much of a lie it might be, and whether or not it's true doesn't matter to them anyway, as long as it has the desired result. And this is basically taking a leaf out of the Donald Trump playbook. So these are not encouraging signs, and it looks as though the British state is planning, as far as possible, to keep crippling Scotland and diluting its independence support, and trying to fracture us into factions who believe in immigration and those who don't believe in immigration, by driving a wedge between us using Farage's Reform Party. So this is, as I say, a foreign toxin which is about to be introduced into the Scottish political body. It's something we need to resist. So just thought I should give you a heads up that this is probably what is going to happen. Musk hasn't yet made his donation, but he is completely ignorant of all politics in this country. He has no idea about Scotland's current position. He doesn't care, frankly, what our position is, but he loves Nigel Farage because they're fellow millionaires and they're fellow extreme far-right populist politicians. Or in Musk's case, he's just a populist billionaire who thinks he runs the entire planet and is now trying to buy up political parties and buy elections using his massive wealth, which, wonderful, but he's turning into Bond villain the way he's going on at the moment. So those are the news items today I thought I should mention, but the idea of making porridge into a junk food and preventing advertising of Scottish breakfast products is a clear attack on our way of life and our culture, and should be resisted at all costs. And I would expect all of the Scottish porridge manufacturers to be up in arms about this straight away and create their own advertising on social media, because let's face it, nobody gets their truth and news from the mainstream media, certainly not in the UK, because you can't trust it anymore. But there's nothing to stop advertising happening by individuals on social media who like Scottish porridge products and want to mention the names of all the manufacturers that they think should be promoted. Nothing to stop us from doing that. I would probably do it on Blue Sky rather than X, because I just don't want to give Elon Musk any more ammunition to use in his ridiculous and simplistic political aspirations. But in the meantime, as far as we're concerned here in Scotland, we need to ready ourselves for a fight in 2026. Apart from fending off Farage and his idiots, we're also going to have to fend off all the other unionist tribes which are gathering together to try and muster some kind of response. The SNP at the moment has been strangely quiet about what it's planning to do in 2026. Well, we don't know what their plans are. It could be anything. But since Alex Salmond's commemoration recently, and the dust is now settled and all that, and all the divisive crap has finally stopped, I think we can start to look forward to a campaigning season over the next 2 years, in which we need to find common ground. All the parties of independence at the moment have not made any terrific statements, but it's interesting that Peter Bell's new Scotland Party, which was founded just a few days ago, is a new kid on the block. And in terms of political parties, it's highly unusual, and it's highly, I would have to say, it's very radical, because first of all, it's a party that doesn't seek elections. It's not fielding candidates in any general elections. It doesn't want seats. It doesn't want a comfy sinecure in a padded seat with plenty of money rolling in and expenses accounts. What it exists to do is to create pressure, political pressure, on all of the other pro-independence parties. And as far as I'm concerned, it's worth getting involved with the New Scotland Party just for that reason alone. So joining it and supporting Peter's call to arms is not a bad thing to do, because it is equally pressurising all pro-independence parties that are currently registered in the electoral registers to do something about holding a referendum in Holyrood. Now, we know that the Supreme Court has said that wouldn't be lawful, that the Scottish Parliament does not have the legislative competence to hold a referendum on something like independence. Now, this is absolute nonsense. As a sovereign people and as a country, we have under the UN Charter the perfect right to exercise our right to self-determination, to choose our own future, to choose who governs us and how, and to choose where the locus of that power is to be located. This is a basic human right that extends to every single individual in every country on the planet, and is the founding principle of the United Nations. Nobody can gainsay in international law that we don't have this right. However, the Supreme Court of England has decided to deny us our democratic rights to vote. So it's incumbent on people like the New Scotland Party to make sure that the other parties of independence are campaigning so that when their candidates are elected, and I'm hoping there'll be a massive majority in favour of independence, that whoever the government is made up of out of these parties has as its primary manifesto pledge to legislate to give back all competence to Holyrood to hold the referendum, to hold it immediately, as soon as possible after that. Yes, that will provoke the United Kingdom. Yes, there will be a political deadlock and there will be a butting of heads between Holyrood and Westminster. But it always has to pass through this point. If we want to become independent, we're going to have to prod this wasp's nest known as Westminster and say, we're just going to do this, and we challenge you to stop it. Because if the United Kingdom reacts in a bad way, and let's say they put police on the streets and decided to have a military lockdown and apply martial law, as was attempted recently in South Korea, unsuccessfully I might add, then how long could the United Kingdom, in the full glare of international news media, keep troops on its own streets? In other words, in Scotland. How long would they be prepared to do that and to subjugate a peaceful, democratic people who are just wanting the right to exercise their democratic rights? Either the UK is a Western democracy or it's an autocracy run by a dictatorship. The BBC, in its wisdom, doesn't like to talk about this kind of thing. They are trying desperately never to mention the I word in any news items at all, and certainly never to mention that the problems that Scotland faces financially have their roots in London, where all the funding flows from, because this is a neglected part of the Scottish news cycle. It needs to be repeated over and over again. The funding crisis in Scotland's NHS is coming from the funding crisis in the English NHS. If it weren't for that, we wouldn't have this problem. Anyway, I look forward to having my porridge every morning for the rest of my life. I have no intentions whatsoever of stopping eating porridge just because the UK says it's junk food, and I dare say the rest of you feel the same way. Anyway, that's it from Inde-Car today. It's a bit miserable here in Glasgow today, but keep your spirits up. There's a long way to go before the 2026 general election, and we have a lot of time to think ahead about how we put pressure on our politicians to actually make sure that there is a second referendum and we win free of this nonsense once and for all. Otherwise, we're going to have the likes of Nigel Farage shooting his mouth off in our parliament when he has no business being there in the first place. That's it from Inde-Car today. I'll see you all again soon. In the meantime, please keep donating as much as you can manage using the donation links I've provided in the past. I'll post a few more just in case. At this time of year, I really need your help more than ever before. And at the moment, I'm operating on fumes, literally nothing much in the bank account at all at the moment. Anyway, thank you for watching to the end of the programme. And as I always say, keep the faith. And we'll see you next time on Inde-Car. Bye for now.